Next to Normal has arrived at the Players Guild of Dearborn, and today we're talking with Sydney Assalley-Williams, who plays Diana in this production, and we are so excited to talk with you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be on.
We had the pleasure of seeing the musical this opening weekend. It was truly such a remarkable show, and there's so many talented individuals. We got to talk to quite a few of them previously. But when I saw you on stage in your performance, I asked the director, I said, can I talk to Sydney? Because you're playing such an incredible role that is probably one of the most difficult roles I think anybody has to play in modern theater. And that's a big statement, I know, but
I would
how
agree.
it's challenging. It's really challenging. But how has your time on this production with the Players Guild of Dearborn been so far?
It's been amazing. I'd have to say I've done this show previously and I will always have like a special place in my heart for that cast, but there is just something about this cast and I really think it comes from Kayla Kolbush, our director. Her like the environment that she created from day one, even like auditions, just it's been fabulous, and it hasn't just been, like, work, work, work. We've also laughed so much, and if you've
Sure.
seen the show, you know there's really not a lot of laughing to be had, so she created this very positive environment and an open space for us to always, like, explore our characters, but also talk about our lives too, so, it's just been fabulous. I've been a member of the Players Guild for 2 years now, so I already knew how awesome the guild is, but I've never worked with Kayla before, so working with Kayla and I haven't worked with the other people on cast either, and they've all been fabulous, remarkably, exceptionally talented, and so it's just been probably my favorite show I've ever worked on, and that not to, like, hate on any other show I've ever worked on, but
For
this has
sure.
probably been my favorite experience I've ever had.
When we talked to Kayla, it's probably been about a week and a half now, but we talked to her and we talked to Kyle and
Mhm.
Momo about the show. There was so much, you could tell there was so much love that Kayla was putting into this. And when you see the production, you can feel it from the set to the actors. Everybody just loves this story and has taken so much time to really understand that. And it makes sense, like you said, like you've been with this show for a long time, it sounds like.
Mhm. Yeah.
What is it
Yes,
like?
11 years.
What is that like from then until now to kind of, I mean, that's a long time to kind of see a story and maybe even see how your perspective changing with that.
Oh, yeah. So I was in high school. I was a senior in high school when I played Natalie the first time 11 years ago. I grew up in Illinois, so it was at a theater in my hometown. And, even seeing, like, the way Nadia plays Natalie, I'm like, why did I even make those choices? Like, I prefer her choices so much more. But I also think that comes with like growing older and having different life experiences, my frontal lobe developing, stuff
Correct.
like
Yeah.
that. And
That's a big
so
deal.
yeah, I know. And so I have just like a different perspective on each character. Um, Before I think I was just so focused on Natalie and what Natalie thought, but stepping into this role of Diana, I obviously have to think about like Diana's thought process, but like how is this impacting Dan? How is this impacting Natalie? How does this impact Gabe and even Henry and even my doctor? And so and I'm not sure Diana spends a whole lot of time like always thinking about how everybody else is impacted, but me as an actor, I'm like, okay, if Diana were to think about how her actions are impacting others, how would she think about this? And so I've just loved seeing this story take shape differently for me over the past 11 years. Like, I think I thought Dan was like this really great guy the first time I first saw Next or was a part of Next Normal. And not that he's not a good guy. I don't want to say he's like a true villain. I think he's doing his best in the situation he's been given. But before I don't think I saw any faults in Dan. And now like seeing it like as I'm older, I'm like, ooh, maybe we could have done
Sure.
something differently about this situation. So I think I look at it more of these characters as true people and less as just characters, if that makes sense.
I was telling the rest of them when I was talking with them that I'd only ever seen or heard next to normal. Like a week before I saw your show, I saw the pro shot. My friend was like, "You have to sit down. You have to watch this. I can't believe you haven't seen it so far."
Oh my gosh, that's so much in, like, a short period of time.
And honestly, it skyrocketed to one of my favorite musicals. But being a psychologist, I was watching it, and he had seen it before, and I was really like, Dan's like kind of, as in family system seriously, we always kind of talk about like which one is benefiting the most, kind of like who's the sick one, and everyone assumes that it's Diana, but Dan's kind of benefiting the most by having these changes done to Diana. So I agree with that. It's
Mhm.
like as an adult, you can kind of see like who's really
I
what's
know.
happening here, who's really benefiting the most.
Yeah, I know, and it's so hard because like, everybody's going through their own different thing, but for Dan, you're like, "What are your intentions behind your choices, Dan?" Like,
Yeah,
what's your thought process here? Are you trying to do this to benefit you or to benefit Diana or Natalie?
correct.
Like, who are you really trying to help? So
So speaking of Diana, you get to play the probably one of the coolest roles again that I've ever seen. You have a lot to kind of dive into, but who is Diana to you?
oh, wow. Diana to me is that is such a hard question. She is, like, the most real character I think I've ever seen on a stage. Um, I like, to get real with you, I don't have bipolar disorder, but I have major depressive disorder. So, like, part of
Uh-huh.
me, like, really connects with Diana, on a very deep level, at least for some of the show. And so to me, like, Diana is a good representation of a lot of the times how I feel. And that's so important, I think, for people when they're watching a show to be able to see themselves on a stage and to see
Sure,
themselves in a story. And that's been my biggest thing with this. I keep saying this exact thing. Like, these are technically like fictional characters, but there is a Diana out there, and there's a Dan out there, and there's a Natalie out there. And somebody that comes and sees the show is going to see themselves portrayed on the stage. So Diana to me is like almost in a way a form of myself. Um,
sure.
and like some of the experiences that I go through. So she's just a very important real life person.
I mean, I again these. I don't. I've seen a lot of shows, and I don't think I've seen a lot of shows that have as like such a normal representation of people, especially with mental health.
Yes.
It's usually very exaggerated, and this
Mhm.
is you can feel how real Diana is in every moment of the show.
Yeah, and I think, part of that is possibly the West End production, the newest production, I think does a better job at showing that. I never saw the original production, but from things that I've read, some of the characters made it seem a little bit more, like, caricature-ish or very,
Sure,
I'm not sure what word I'm looking for, but they didn't really do the characters justice. It almost
sure.
felt like in a mocking sense, where the West End production, you're watching it and you're just like, I feel like you're sitting there with the family in their living room and you're watching them go through what they're going through. And you're like, this is real. Like, it
Yeah.
doesn't feel made up at all.
And I think there's a scene right at the beginning, without spoiling too much, obviously, I don't want to give too much away, but there's a scene where Diana is making sandwiches
Yes.
on the floor. And like when I saw it with the West End production, and I thought, I was like, this is a real situation. But I could see where that could be exaggerated maybe in another production. Where this one,
Hmm.
again, even with you, it felt so real of like sometimes like it makes sense in that moment to Diana
Yeah.
to be making all of these sandwiches. But everyone else can kind of stop and be like, whoa, wait a second. And so like again, that's that real moment there.
Yeah. I think a lot of people have not experienced their mother making sandwiches on the floor, like in a manic episode. However, there are people that probably have witnessed that and maybe more. And so
Yeah.
them sitting and watching this, they'll be like, yeah, that's my mom. Like,
Yeah, for
I've
sure.
experienced this, and so to some people, it's like, "What is happening?" But that's also somebody else's reality too. So,
So with this show, your character's dealing with grief and mental health issues, and that's really such a big motivator for this. So how did you go about developing a character with that in mind?
actually, my parents have been my biggest. motivator, I would say. So sadly, we lost my brother 2 years ago,
I'm so
very
sorry.
abruptly. Thank you. And so in I've obviously dealt with my own grief in the past 2 years, but also watching it like from my parents' perspective and everybody else's perspective and seeing how everybody's grief is different, but also I'm playing a mom, you know? And so I've been trying to think about what is it like to grieve from a parent's perspective, you
Sure.
know? And so that's been kind of big for me. Cuz I think losing a sibling is one thing and grief is different for everybody. It's not there's no right or wrong and there's no my grief is bigger than your grief. But I think it's different coming from a parent's perspective. And so
Sure.
I think that has been my biggest motivator in this is trying to empathize with my parents' grief, for losing my brother, and so that's been a big part of it. I also did a lot of reading about bipolar disorder,
Sure.
and, like, because you hear things, like, people will say, "Oh, I'm so bipolar," and, like, they make light of, like, what it means to be bipolar, and I'm like, "Okay, that let's, like, actually see what does bipolar disorder really look like?" And so I read about, like, type 1 versus type 2 and what those really look like for each person, and so that was also a big part of this. But I also, like, love the show and I listen to
Sure.
the show all the time. So, as I listen to it, even prior to doing this show, I'm always thinking like, "Okay, why are they saying it this way? What do these words mean? Is there another meaning here behind this?" So,
I mean, first off, again, I'm so sorry to hear about your brother, but like, what a way to honor your parents. That's like a way to understand them because you're right. Like, if you're looking at it from a psychological term, natural order is that parents are not supposed to,
yep.
have to bury their kids. Like, that's
Yeah.
really, and so I love that you're using that to understand Diana more. Like, that's beautiful, even though like it comes from a tragedy, and I'm so sorry, but like, that's
Yeah.
wow.
No, and I think um there can be a lot of beauty in grief, in the way that you form different connections with people and how your relationships can change. And so, obviously, our family dynamic changed a lot losing my brother. However, I think it's really brought like me and my sister and my parents closer together in a way that we never really thought we'd have to be close. And it's had us look at life from each other's perspectives. And so I think there's some beauty in that, even in how tragic it was.
I think one of the moments that I love, like, I loved in both versions, but when you delivered it is at the end when you finally get to have a moment with Natalie where you say the things that you never said before. And it's
Hmm.
kind of like that moment too, where like there finally is an understanding. Like, yeah, she kind of says goodbye to Dan and stuff, and she kind of moves on with her life, but she also gets to have this moment where she connects with her daughter in a way that she never did before because there was so much that was just left unsaid.
You know, and I think that relationship was actually, like, the hardest for me because 'cause I'm like, "How do I go from, like, not connecting with my daughter through this entire show to just at the end being like, 'Oh, things are gonna be okay.'" And I think that was, like, the hardest, like, how do I show the trajectory of our relationship changing throughout the show? And so that, I think, was probably the hardest relationship for me to gauge during the show.
Well, I think you're right because I think that there's such a focus on Diana and wow, Gabe. I forgot.
Mhm.
I blinked for a second. Like that is the driving force of the show,
Yeah.
and as a result, you have Dan there. But like Natalie's kind of neglected because of that, and that
Oh,
doesn't
yeah,
even see a lot of that dynamic throughout the show.
for sure. Yeah, it's and I love I love Nadia, by the way, that's who plays Natalie, and her and Momo who plays Gabe, like, they're younger than I am, and so I just, like, look at them, and I'm not a mom, but I'm like, "You're my babies, like, you're
Right.
my kids," like, if I had, like, teenage kids, like, that's how I feel about them in a sense, and so they make it easy, but, like, at that end, like, when we are, like, holding hands and hugging, like, we're not really we're truly, like, connecting, like, on a soul level in that moment, and, like, we both feel it when we do it, and the opening night, like, the audience clapped like, when we hugged, and I was like,
Oh.
"I don't even think they were clapping because we sound great. I think they were clapping because we were hugging," and I loved it.
But you do sound great. I do want you to know
Oh,
that
thank
too.
you. Thank you. But she's phenomenal, and so I'm like, as
Yes.
good as we sound, I'm like, I think they were, like, cheering up for us and our relationship, and so that was just great to see that that's how it ended for us, and then I, like, walk up and I just, like, watch her for a second, and I feel like I get that proud mom moment with her.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Absolutely. When you come to a show like this, like when you talk about like bipolar disorder, the songs that are in this show, they're very high and there's the valleys and there's the dips and stuff like that.
Yes.
What is it like to sing these songs? But also, how do you prepare for something like sometimes you're going from like crazy fast songs to slow songs and back and you're nailing every one. Like, what is that like? How do you prepare?
Yeah, I mean, thankfully, I've known this show for so long, so that made
Sure.
it a lot easier. I can't tell you the amount of hours I spent in the car driving to and from Illinois just singing this musical. However, Vanessa, who is our music director, she's phenomenal, and she helped in curating like the sound and like how we would depict our sound in certain aspects of the song. But then also, like, it is very physically taxing. I think my hardest song that I sang, uh, is probably, oh, I can hear it, not The Break. The Break is hard, but it's Didn't I See This Movie? Where, I'm
Yes.
not gonna say, like, what happens in that song because I don't wanna give anything away, but that is probably the most vocally demanding song that I have to do because it's fast and it's also at the top of my belting range, and so, like, my abs hurt. Like, I can feel it hurt, and I think staying hydrated is my biggest thing. I drink so much water throughout the day and throughout the show. We have it set so I can drink water on stage, and I'm constantly going over to the pitcher and filling my cup up, and I have, like, a Stanley cup on the table so that I can stay hydrated. So staying hydrated is big. I steam my vocal folds, also before the show, and I do some lozenges and honey and tea and all of that. Um, so yeah, but knowing the music was helpful because I didn't have
Sure.
to think so much about the words and, like, how the song goes. I could really focus more on the intensity of, like, how I wanted to portray certain aspects, and then I always treat songs, as a marathon and not a race, and so
Sure.
you can't just, like, get to the belting. You have to work up to it and tell a story with the inflection in your voice, and so that also helps for stamina through all those songs.
First off, I want to say I did clock the water thing with the
Oh my
pitcher
god.
because so first I was like, oh yeah, like that makes sense. And then also I was like, I think that she is just like she
She's
needs
drinking
to
a lot of water, and I said something before the show on Saturday. I was like, "Does it look really obvious that I'm drinking a lot of water?" And they're like, "No, it doesn't." I'm like, "Somebody out there is gonna know." Good catch.
uh, I think that it was just because I like it looked so natural. It does, but I
Mhm.
think after seeing so many shows, you just get used to like watching people. And I was like, it's after every song where she's just killing it. She's like she walks over there. Which is
Oh
it's
my god.
smart. That was the smartest thing. I was like, that's a really smart tactic that you don't even think about. The
Yeah,
kitchen's right there.
I barely leave the stage, in
Yeah.
this show. I think I leave it for, like, 2 whole songs, I think, altogether, and I don't even know how many songs are in this show. It's
A lot.
mostly singing. It's mostly singing. There are very few lines in the show, and I have a cup on the back of the set that I have sitting there, so whatever, like, we do a lot of quick changes in the show, so I'll go sip water real quick even when I'm off stage, but there's no way I could get through this show without drinking water, because like, after every scene, I'm like, "My throat is so dry." Even though I'm super hydrated.
And not only that, like you talk about being on stage the entire time of the show, you're on stage before the show, which you have a really kind of cool before show little ritual. And I was like, what's going on? This is really cool. Watching you kind of go through some emotions and stuff. That was such a brilliant thing too, but that adds time to the show, obviously.
Yes, Kayla, our fearless leader, and her vision is just amazing. I couldn't have asked for a better director, and throughout this whole process, she texted me on Thursday night, and she's like, "I'd be kinda crazy if I would suggest you would stay on stage for the pre-show," and I'm like, I'm down to be crazy. And
It
so I was
fits
like,
so
just give
well.
me some tea and an apple and we'll be good. So I had my pre-show apple on the stage.
Hey, that's the perfect way to do it, right?
I know, I love it.
So, is there a moment in the show where you feel like you understand Diana the most?
I've never thought of this. From a personal standpoint, like from my life experience, when she says this line, she says, "I don't feel like myself. I don't feel anything." I resonate with that very well.
Sure.
Um, Towards the end of the show, I feel like there's this clarity that Diana has had for the first time in her life, and I think I understand that part of Diana, is like her life has been so chaotic, and then she feels like Dan's trying to control this situation again, and she's like, "This is the first time in my life I actually am just trying to understand what's going on and not just let life happen around me." And I feel like that's probably the part I understand Diana the most.
That's such a beautiful part too. Such a
I
beautiful
know.
moment.
I know.
Um, then just one final question for you. Just what are you hoping audiences take away from this production of Next to Normal?
Oh, I really hope that if there is one or more if there's just one person in this in the audience that comes and sees this show, that they don't feel alone, especially if they see themselves in one or more of these characters, um, because it's so real what's happening in this show. And I just and it can be hard to find resources sometimes, especially if you don't have a good, a strong support system, or even if you do and, like, you just don't know where to start. Thankfully, like, there's lots of resources that we're providing, like, in the lobby, and I think in the program as well. But also, I hope just watching it, they say, "I'm not the only one who's experienced this in my life." Like, they just feel seen, maybe even for the first time in their life, because I think that's really what everybody wants at the end of the day, is just to feel seen and heard and understood. And so that's what I really hope people take away from the show.
Perfect answer. So beautiful and so true. And I think they will. Again, listeners, I cannot stress enough how fantastic this show is, and everybody should go see it and experience this. And I think that's going to spark a lot of conversations because, again, mental health is difficult to talk about sometimes. And this, I think, is an easy way to maybe normalize that and talk about this and know that you're not alone.
Yeah. I know. I always think of like the Dear Evan Hansen song, "You Were Not Alone." I'm like, if we could just like fit that in here somewhere, like that would be great. So yeah, but
We'll just take a
please, like,
beat.
yeah, please, like, come see the show. I mean, it can be scary, like, hearing how heavy the show is, but I think you also leave with this sense of, like, hope at the end of it all.
I will agree. I will confirm that this show is not about being hopeless in our mental health, but it's about that there is light at the end of the tunnel. And sometimes we just have to find the right person to kind of listen to us. And sometimes I think in the case of Diana, it's finally listening to herself.
Agree. She finally, like, advocates for herself because she can finally see clearly, like, what's kind of happening, and I love that.
Thank you so much, Jenny, for being here. It's been such a pleasure. And I cannot praise you and the cast and the crew and Kayla, the director, enough and what you're doing here. So thank you from both as a critic and as a therapist. Thank you for Next to Normal.
Well, thank you, Brian. I really appreciate it. I'm so glad you came to see the show and loved it.
So Next to Normal runs through the 22nd. So get your tickets now and we'll see you at the show.